it's gonna be alright.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Trans Stupid, where I take a look at the wonderful world of LGBTQIA+++ news, because stupidity is intersectional. So the first story I'm going to touch on this week actually broke back when my last video uploaded. Now, that's kind of the problem with having a weekly upload schedule for this, but I digress. This is actually on a subject I was going to cover in an individual video, but I might as well knock off some of the points now. A lot of you are no doubt aware of Rachel McKinnon. Now, for those lucky enough to have not heard of this wonderful individual, she is quite a up-and-coming prominent trans activist, someone who has joked about setting her political opponents on fire and also laughed at the death of a young woman from brain cancer. So, real grade A, top-notch tranner there. Now, McKinnon, unsurprisingly, managed to set Twitter aflame yet again last week. Now, what did she do this time? Well, as the Post-Millennial reports, trans athlete claims lesbians are transphobic for not liking penises. Dr. Rachel McKinnon, philosophy professor, cyclist, trans woman, came to fame in 2018 when she made history by being the first trans athlete to win the women's 2018 UCI Masters Track Cycling World Championships. McKinnon is a vocal trans advocate who has spoken out in favour of trans women competing in women's sports and has physically dominated biological women in her own sport of cycling, and, most recently, has taken to Twitter to pen endless threads against the so-called cotton ceiling. So what were these threads exactly? Let's break out the typical music and take a wonderful dive into McKinnon's psyche. I like dick. Girl with dick says, hey, wanna date? Oh, no. I only like dick on guys. Guy responds to date ad. Sup, girl? Guy has a vagina. Oh, sorry. I only like guys with dicks. Both cases, trans people are left in the cold. Genital preferences are transphobic. Most people don't date genitals, we date people who have genitals. If a girl has a funny looking vagina, I don't just stop dating her, I make it work. Because a funny looking vagina and a penis are pretty much the same thing. And this reminds me of a brilliant quote from noted trans activist and former NUS officer Jess Bradley, who can tell us all about it.
Maybe my vagina looks like a penis.
What the fuck?
Date genders and just learn how to have fun with their sexy fun time bits, whatever they happen to be. I actually think any sexual orientation other than pan is immoral, because sexual genital preferences immoral. But that means I think hetero people are just as bad off. You'd be excluding trans people who haven't had genital surgery to be the kind you prefer. Preferences are not amoral. I just don't like black people is racist. I just don't like dick is transphobic. So yeah, this is a reference to the cotton ceiling. Now, what is the cotton ceiling? It's something which is quite debated amongst a lot of trans activists, and some of them will, to their credit, which we will touch on later, openly disagree with this notion. However, for those who haven't heard of it before, the cotton ceiling was a term made by a trans porn star called Drew DeVue, basically talking about how support for trans causes generally draws the line at sleeping with trans women, or including trans lesbians in sexual communities. It's apparently a reference to the glass ceiling, the idea that women can only reach a certain point in their career. Well, tranners can only reach a certain point with sex, the cotton being a reference to underwear. Now, as I mentioned, there are people who disagree with this, however, it does gain traction at some places. For example, here's a couple of comments from people who are openly advocating for the idea that you should sleep with trans people regardless of their genitals. And of course, assigned male has touched on this subject numerous times. I don't know, man. I just never date a trans person. That's transphobic. How so? I'm allowed to have preferences. That's not a preference. That's a prejudice. Trans people have all types of bodies, genitalia, and experiences. Chances are that you've been attracted to trans folks already. Don't call me a transphobe, okay? I have a fragile ego. Now, it should be noted that McKinnon did actually get a little bit of backlash from some prominent trans activists, including Paris Lees, which was a little bit strange. I didn't expect her to dare to stand up against the great McKinnon, but also Adrian Harrop, he is someone who has repeatedly criticised radfems in the past for being exclusionary of trans people, only to face accusations of transphobia himself now. But being the good boy he is, he eventually cooked and offered a kind of apology for daring to express a different point of view. So this idea of the cotton ceiling is something which I find incredibly toxic. The idea that if you want to accept trans people, you need to also sleep with us is something which is incredibly predatory, I must say. Now, it should be noted that to claim this as a part of acceptance pushes things a little bit far. When you're wanting to accept gay people, that generally doesn't really intrude in your personal life all that much. You're not being asked to sleep with them, you're just being asked to acknowledge that they exist. Something like the cotton ceiling, however, this idea that, well, because people aren't being attracted to trans people, if you're a real advocate, you would be there with us in bed, adds an extra level of acceptance, which is just far and beyond anything which anyone could reasonably accept, really. And this kind of lines up with the meme over the last couple of years when it comes to LGBT rights. Back in the day, it was just accept us and let us live our lives, only to then be bake the cake, bigot. Only now it's suck the dick, bigot. And the thing is, it's pushing itself out of being a meme when you have people like Dr. McKinnon and assigned male openly championing this. This is not a niche opinion. Now, again, there are plenty of trans people, some even trans rights activists, who would disagree with this and realise how bizarre the idea that telling someone they have to suck a dick, otherwise they don't actually like trans people and they want us rounded up into camps, is bizarre. But again, these are the ones who are being pushed to the sidelines as the more extreme ones take the forefront, and this is the message that they run with. The idea that your sexuality has to allow people in that you are not attracted to, that is a level of control. That is saying to you that you are no longer allowed to choose who you are most intimate with. Unless you want to be an alt-right fascist neo-Nazi, you must suck dick, regardless of what you like. And the thing is, I would fall into this trap as well. I am pretty much exclusively attracted to men, and I am exclusively attracted to men with penises. I probably wouldn't date a trans man because a trans man doesn't have a penis. You know, am I being a bigot to trans men by doing that? Probably not. And besides, I know what I like. I'm sure trans guys, a lot of them probably don't want women who maybe used to have a dick as well. It's this kind of idea controls all of us. It catches all of us in, and the idea of saying asexuality is immoral. This is peak current year. The idea that you have to be attracted to everyone. But let me just spell it all out. No, you're not a bigot if you don't want to suck that lady dick. You're not a bigot if you don't want to chow down on that guy pussy. God, this is really cringe. But it has to be cringy because it's such a dumb topic. But again, this is what people are pushing. And, you know, we all have to call this out. Jesus Christ. But the next story that I want to touch on is almost a follow-up to a story I covered a couple of months ago regarding a Christian doctor who refused to call a hypothetical bearded trans woman she in a conversation. Well, there's been an update in this story. Christian doctor who refused to call transgender woman she loses employment tribunal. The 56-year-old alleged the DWP discriminated against his religious beliefs, costing him his job as a disability claim assessor. David McKinnon claimed he was sacked after saying he would not call any 6-foot-tall bearded man madam during an abstract discussion with his manager. The 56-year-old from Dudley, West Midlands, alleged the Department for Work and Pensions discriminated against his religious beliefs, costing him his job as a disability claim assessor. But a tribunal panel unanimously concluded the lack of belief in transgenderism and conscientious objection to transgenderism in our judgment are incompatible with human dignity and conflict with the fundamental rights of others, specifically here, transgender individuals. Publishing its conclusions, the tribunal panel said, in our unanimous judgment, there was no contravention of Part 5 of the Equality Act 2010 and the claimant was not subjected to discrimination. These complaints are dismissed. Now, Dr. McCarriff has said he would appeal, and whilst he noted that trans individuals may find his views to be offensive, he says that there is no deliberate desire to be offensive to trans people. Interestingly, the tribunal found his beliefs were likely to cause offence and have the effect of violating a transgender person's dignity or creating a prescribed environment or subjecting a trans person to less favourable treatment. Now, it's interesting that they refer specifically to transgenderism. That is an ideology, not just being trans or transsexual, but actually not following a particular ideology. And ultimately, the doctor is relying on his Christian beliefs and his idea that you cannot change gender. Now, I might disagree with his religious beliefs there. However, it is very important that he should be allowed to have them. The state should not be able to tell you what you can and cannot think. And that is exactly what is happening here. This should worry everyone. There is no doubt you hold some sort of belief that somebody else finds problematic. And simply being able to express that could cost you your job. And what's more, he lost his job over a hypothetical situation. He wasn't referring to a trans woman who looks like, say, Talisa Garcia. He was referring to someone that might look like Alex Drummond, the bearded woman. How is this fair? To say that you must refer to this person as a woman. I know this is a cliche, but it feels very, very much 1984. It's terrifying that this can happen. And what's more, you should be allowed to disagree with transgenderism. Hell, I'm a transsexual. I disagree with it as well. And there are a lot of trans people who disagree with it too. There's loads of us. There's probably more of us who disagree with it than are the ones controlling the narrative. At least from my interactions with other trans people, there's so many of us have common sense when it comes to this. And yet we're being pushed aside in the name of ideology. And that's why this guy ultimately lost his job. Because he has to forgo his own religious beliefs and the freedom he should have to hold those beliefs in favour of progressive dogma. Now, this wasn't the only pronoun story involving a man losing their job for referring to use them pronouns. As BuzzFeed reported, a teacher was fired for refusing to use a trans student's pronouns and has resulted to sue the school for doing so. Now, in this particular story, a female to male student was transitioning in this guy's class. He refused to use pronouns, although he said that he would just not use pronouns at all, almost like a compromise. However, it does appear he slipped up a couple of times. As a result, the trans boy left the class and he was ultimately fired for doing so. But he would also misgender the trans boy in private as well, and that seemed to form a part of it. Now, this would definitely be a bit of a more different situation, considering there is an actual human involved and not a hypothetical. Now, you can say that he might have been like a bit unsympathetic if you're actually face to face with someone, and if that person is putting in effort to transition, I would certainly say respect them pronouns if they're working it. Of course, with the young age of the trans person involved, we're never really going to know exactly what's going on there, but specifically in private, I don't think you should be able to lose your job over this. That seems to be, this is very much a point of religious belief getting into conflict with trans issues. And is it really fair to draw a judgment and say that one has to override the other? I mean, I'm an atheist, and I think that's unfair because people should be allowed to hold their beliefs. However, you shouldn't lose your job just for being a bit of a dick. Ultimately, that's kind of where I land on this one. Now, the last story that I'm going to be touching on is something that, a lot of us probably didn't see coming in a million years. So hold on to your butts as, I completely blow your mind. Hundreds of young trans people seeking help to return to original sex.
I am shocked. Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Charlie Evans, 28, was born female but identified as male for nearly 10 years before detransitioning. The number of young people seeking gender transition is at an all-time high, but we hear very little, if anything, about those who may come to regret their decision. There is currently no data to reflect the number who may be unhappy in their new gender or who may opt to detransition to their biological sex. Charlie detransitioned and went public with her story last year, and said she was stunned by the number of people she discovered in a similar position. She said, "I'm in communication with 19 and 20-year-olds who have had full gender reassignment surgery who wish they hadn't, and their dysphoria hasn't been relieved. They don't feel better for it. They don't know what their options are now." She says she's been contacted by hundreds of people seeking help, 30 people alone in her area of Newcastle. She went on to say, "I think some of the more common characteristics are they tend to be around their mid-20s, they're mostly female and mostly same-sex attracted and often autistic as well." She recalls being approached by a young girl with a beard who hugged her after giving a public talk, who explained she was a detransitioned woman as well. Charlie added, she said she felt shunned by the LGBT community for being a traitor, so I felt I had to do something. Charlie's now launching a charity called the Detransition Advocacy Network, with their first meeting set to be held in Manchester at the end of the month. Now, this should go without saying, but I might as well point this out. A lot of this at the moment is purely anecdotal on Charlie's behalf, although the report does indicate that there's not a lot of data to really reflect the amount of people who are detransitioning at this time. However, I've seen a bit of what Charlie's been doing, and she seems quite different to a lot of the detransitioners that I've come across in the past. By that I mean a common problem I have with the detransition community, so to speak, in that because transitioning didn't work for them, they therefore think that it shouldn't work for anyone, and they actively promote against it and saying that that should be taken away from us because if it didn't help them, it can't help anybody else, right? But Charlie at least seems to be a little bit more grounded, and she's simply saying transition didn't work for her and so wants to find other ways around it. Now, the idea of there being a lot of people detransitioning seems very much believable. We're seeing record numbers of people being reflected to the... We're seeing now the idea of there being hundreds of people detransitioning does certainly seem plausible. I mean, we're seeing record numbers of people being referred to gender clinics when this never used to be the case until it became the cool thing to be trans. And I do believe that some of these people are rushing into it a little bit too much, especially when you have the number of people getting crowd-funded breast removal or hormones to grow facial hair. This is going to mess up a lot of young women who are falling into the trans-trender is the cool way forward kind of crew. What I don't want to see happen ultimately is detransitioners pushing it as though everyone must therefore be a trender, and as I mentioned before, this is a huge problem I have with that movement. However, I would like to see more of a realistic approach where maybe transsexuals and detransitioners can kind of come together and just be like, make sure if you're going to go through the very intrusive medical route, be as certain that you can that it's going to be the right thing for you, rather than just rushing into it because it's the cool thing to do. The modern community really does push that anyone and anything can be trans. Even if the numbers aren't quite as high as Charlie has said, we know it's only a matter of time before this moves out of being an anecdote to being a full-on scandal. And as I keep on saying, when all of this stuff blows up, who are the ones who are going to be affected? Well, it's going to be people like me, going to be people like a lot of my viewers. A lot of us, regardless of where we really kind of sit in the political spectrum, there's a lot of trans people can kind of at least come together and agree that the modern community is incredibly toxic. And ultimately that's going to be so much more damaging to us than anything the gender critical TERFs could say about us. It's like the trans community are their own worst enemies, and pushing people to transition when they really shouldn't be is not exactly the best advert out there for who we are. Anyway, provided Charlie doesn't go down the absolutely nobody should have a transition route, I certainly wish her all the best, and hopefully there will be a lot of support for detransitioners. The only thing I would say is both respect each other. I think it's wrong to condemn detransitioners as traitors, just to outline that, but also don't call us deluded either. I transitioned nearly 10 years ago now. I've never looked back. I've never been happier with my life. And I recognise that transition is probably not going to be for everyone either. So it's good that there will at least be support for those who need it. So what do you think of the stories I've covered this week? Is there anything in particular I've missed out? Please let me know in the comments. So thank you all so much for watching. Just before I go, I just want to give everyone a massive thank you, because the other day I managed to reach 20,000 subscribers, which is insane. Just a couple of months ago, I released my 2,000 subscriber special, and that for me was a big enough benchmark moment. And 20,000, that is, like, I can barely get my head around it. Like, I'm getting so many comments, whether it's on YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, and like, honestly, I wish I had the time to respond to everyone. It's very amazing. It's absolutely amazing, and I want to thank you all so much for your support. There is no way that, like, I'm basically speechless on it, but I am thinking of doing a couple of different videos to mark the 20,000 special. One of them will be a more dedicated normal video, but I'm also playing around with the idea of maybe doing a live stream Q&A. I'm not sure whether this would be the kind of thing which people would want, but if it is, please let me know in the comments. I'll certainly get something arranged, and it can be something a little bit more laid back, a little bit more candid. We could just kind of like hang out, get to know each other a little bit better. But once again, thank you all so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and you can also support me on Patreon and Subscribestar, and I'll see you all next time. And a special thanks to Dan Norman, James C. George, Liz Udesu, The Poor of Rizzo, Rose Hypnol, Traname Girl, Casey Adolphson, The Leviathan, James UK, Evil Moif, and the rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.